In this tutorial, I'll be showing you how to use the pop-up location in Monarch. The Monarch pop-up is a lightbox modal window pop-up that includes sharing buttons, and this pop-up can be triggered based on various different triggers within the Monarch settings panel. So first off, let me just show you what the pop-up is. So I'm on a page here, and as I scroll down, this pop-up appears asking your visitors to share. So now let's go take a look at how to set up this pop-up. The first thing you're going to want to do is go to your WordPress dashboard and then go to Tools, Monarch Settings, and you're going to be brought to the Locations settings, and you're going to want to make sure that the pop-up location is enabled. So right now you can see the green check mark. That means I have it enabled. You can click it again to disable it, and if it's already disabled, then just click it to enable it. Make sure you have the green check mark there. So once the pop-up location has been enabled, we have to go ahead and configure that pop-up. So on the left, look for the pop-up tab. And then you're going to be brought to a list of settings where you can configure that pop-up. There's various settings here. You can choose your icon style, which is the hover animation. You can choose the shape. You can adjust the title or message that appears above the sharing buttons. You can choose various display settings such as icon alignment, adjust the columns. You can adjust the triggers. And getting down to the bottom here, we have some custom color settings. And then the post type settings, which is where you can control where the pop-up displays, and more specifically on which post types the pop-up displays, whether it be the post type or a page, or if you have custom post types such as the product post type that comes with WooCommerce or the project post type that comes with Divi, you can choose those as well. So let's start changing some of these settings just so I can show you what they do. So the icon style, that is the hover animation, and you can actually preview the hover animation right here in the settings panel. So just try each of these out and choose one that you like best. And I'm going to go with this nice flip animation. So select it, you get the green check mark, and that means you've enabled that animation style. Next up is the icon shape. Right now we have a rounded rectangle shape for the buttons. This affects the buttons within the pop-up, not the pop-up itself. So you can choose square, rounded rectangle, or circle. I'm going to keep it rounded rectangle for now. And then next up is the title and message. So you can input something here. Right now it says tell your friends, but you can say something else like please share our page. And so I'm going to save and then take a look at that. So scrolling down here, you can see the title has been adjusted to please share our page, and the animation has been changed to this flip animation here. So that's how the settings work. You just adjust the settings in the panel, and then you can go preview your pop-up to see what those do. So moving on to the display settings, there's quite a bit of display settings here, so I'm going to go over each one by one, starting with icon alignment. So icon alignment adjusts where the icon is aligned within the button itself. So within each sharing button, each of them has an icon that represents the social website that it's going to lead to, and you can have that icon either be on the left or centered. So let's change it to centered and see what that looks like. I'm going to save, go back, refresh. Scroll down here and you can see now the icon has been centered along with the name and the share count of the network. Now, this setting in particular changes the height of the button quite a bit because everything becomes stacked. So this is a style you can play with if you want to make your buttons a bit bigger. In this case, since we only have 6 sharing locations here, the centered looks quite nice. But if you have quite a few sharing buttons, then the centered style might get a little too big, a little too overbearing for your visitors. So and it also depends on how much content you're having displayed within the button. So if you have the title and the share count disabled, then this stacking effect doesn't occur, and the height of the button won't be increased as much. So it's really just a personal preference. But in general, you probably don't want to use the centered style if you have a lot of buttons in your pop-up. Going back to the number of columns, this will affect the column layout, the column structure of your buttons. So you can see I have 3, which means there's a row of 3 buttons. And if I adjust that to 2, for example, it's going to become a row of 2 buttons. So instead of 3 by 2, it's going to become 2 by 3 since I have 6 buttons added right now. So just to show you what that looks like, I'm going to change it to 2, and I'm going to change this back to left. And we can refresh. And there you go. So now we have 2 columns of buttons, and our icons have been placed back on the left, which, as you can see, makes the buttons much smaller since the information is no longer being stacked. All right, next up, we have the intro animation. So this is the animation that appears as soon as the pop-up is displayed. By default, we should have a fade in, but there's lots of fun animations you can try, or you can just disable the animation entirely. So let's just test out one of these so I can show you. I'm going to choose the slide up instead of the fade in. And as you can see here, when we refresh, the pop-up is going to slide in from the bottom instead of just fading in. And if you want to get a little more crazy, you can try some of this other stuff like the ta-da animation, which will definitely get your visitor's attention. So let me show you this one. There we go, ta-da. Okay, so you can play with those animations and just choose whatever one you like best. Next up are our triggers. So the triggers you can use to trigger the pop-up based on different user actions. And so I'm going to go over each of these triggers, and you can use these in combination to get different effects, and you can play with these to see which ones actually results in more sharing activity on your page. So as for the triggers we have timing delay, an inactivity trigger, a trigger at the bottom of the post, a trigger after commenting, trigger after scrolling, and trigger after WooCommerce purchase. And we may be adding support for other e-commerce systems in the future. So the time delay, simply if you have the time delay trigger enabled, then that pop-up is going to trigger. It's going to pop up based on just the delay of time. So it's going to count down based on how many seconds you want. So if you enable the time delay and then you change your delay to 10 seconds, let's say, then as soon as someone visits your page and they've been on that page for 10 seconds, the pop-up will appear. So let's just show you that. I'm going to change it to 5 seconds. So I've enabled the time delay trigger. I've changed the delay to 5 seconds. I'm going to save and refresh. And if we just wait here for a few seconds, you'll see the pop-up will display. And there you go. Next up, we have the inactivity delay. So much like the timing delay, this pop-up will appear after a certain amount of time, but only when the user has been inactive for that amount of time. So for example, if your visitor has read your page, and then for some reason they clicked a link to a different page, and they left your tab inactive, and then they go to eat lunch and they come back and they've forgotten about your page, well, then this timing delay will make that pop up and try to re-grab their attention when they come back to your tab, and hopefully they'll be reminded to share. So I'm going to change this to 5 seconds and save. So we go back to our page. Let's say I'm scrolling around and reading the post. The pop-up isn't going to display while I'm active, which means it's also a little bit less annoying than the other pop-up. But as soon as I'm done reading and I stop interacting with the page, and that pop-up will display after 5 seconds like that. The next is trigger at the bottom of the post. So it's pretty self-explanatory, and when this is enabled, the pop-up will display as soon as the reader has finished reading your post and reached the bottom of your post. This is actually one of my favorite triggers because it only engages those who are most engaged with your page, and it also only engages them once they're finished reading the post, which means you're not in danger of annoying them halfway through the post, which can be good or bad depending on how aggressive you want to get with these pop-ups and what kind of content you're displaying. So it's really up to you, and these triggers can be used in combination, and they can be used for different reasons depending on the content that you're using and the kind of results you're trying to get. So like I said, this will trigger at the bottom of the post, so you're reading the post and you get down to the bottom and it displays. Ask them to share. Next up is the trigger after commenting. This is also a really great one because it targets your not only engaged users, but your most engaged users, those users who have decided to comment on the post. So these people, they're obviously engaged with the post, they've gone as far as to comment in the post, and they are one of the most likely types of people to share your post. And so if they, oops, I forgot to save. Trigger after commenting. So with this trigger, once they comment, they're going to be asked to share. So yeah, it's another great pop-up, and it's one that's not annoying at all. And like I said, it targets your most engaged users and can be used in combinations with the other triggers. So it's a nice one to have enabled. Okay, next up is the trigger after scrolling. So this is pretty similar to the trigger after commenting, which means you can use it to kind of trigger based on where they are on the page, but this gives you like a little bit more granular control. You can control exactly where on the page they are, how far down they have to scroll before that pop-up pops up. So this can be used, say you have a page with content that's kind of broken into certain categories, and you want that pop-up to display after they've read a certain part of the page, and you think, maybe after reading this part, they're going to be most engaged and most likely to share. Well, you can decide to display that pop-up, let's say 50% down the page, or 100% down the page, or whatever. Maybe you want to hit them right in the beginning, do 10% down the page, and so on. So this is the trigger after scrolling trigger. Enable that, and then you're going to get this second option here, which says % down the page, and you can decide how far down the page the user has to scroll before that pop-up appears. And by default, it's 50%. So just to give you an idea of how that works, as soon as I scroll down 50% of the page, I'm going to get the pop-up. Okay, next up is the trigger after purchasing. And I'm not going to do a demo of this, but it's pretty self-explanatory, and that is after they make a purchase with WooCommerce, they're going to be asked to share your website, which is another time when you're hitting a person that's most engaged. They're not only engaged with your page, they're a fan of you and you're a fan of your product. They've just purchased your product, and they're very likely to share the fact that they purchased their product with their friends. So this is another great way to enable a social sharing pop-up that's not annoying at all and really hits your most targeted users. All right, next up is the display once per session option. So if you have, let's say you have the after time delay enabled, and this pop-up is going to pop up after 5 seconds on every single page you go to, every single post. Well, that might not be a big problem for the majority of your visitors who, let's say, are coming in through Google and reading one of your blog posts. Let's say you only have this pop-up enabled on the post type. Well, it's probably not that big of a deal, but if you're worried about these visitors exploring more deeply into your website and getting hit with this pop-up on every page, well, then you can enable this option, which will prevent the pop-up from displaying more than once per session. So every time they come to your website and they continue on to more pages, they're only going to get hit with a pop-up once. No matter how many triggers you have enabled, they're only going to see that pop-up once, and once they close it, they're never going to see it again until they leave your site and come back some other day. So you can enable this, display once per session, and you can choose the session duration. So let's say you only want this person to see one pop-up at most once per day, then you can put in 1 day here. Let's say you want to be, play it really safe and only want each person to see one pop-up once per week, then you can put in 7 days, and so on. Next is the display share counts. So this is the number that appears within the buttons that says how many times the post has been shared. So if you disable this, then that number is going to go away. So I'm going to disable that for you. And then take a look at what that pop-up looks like. So scrolling down here, you can see the numbers have been removed, and it just gives a bit of a cleaner look. And like I said, if you're using the centered style, then removing this will make your buttons a bit smaller. So if you want to use that centered style, but you don't want your buttons to be too big, you can start removing things like the share count. Also, if your pages don't have a lot of shares, you might not want to display share counts. Okay, so I'm going to put share counts back on. And the next up is the total shares. So this will tally up all the shares you have on a page and display a total share count. So if you enable that, then that total share count is going to be shown above your buttons. So you can see I've put the share count back on within the buttons. So obviously my page has not been shared. I'm just on localhost here, so I have a bunch of zeros. And then 0 times 6 is still 0. So I still have 0 shares total. But if I had, a few shares in each of these networks, like 10 on Facebook, 10 on Google, and 10 on Twitter, then the total share count would be 30. Okay, so the All Networks button, this will display a button that, when clicked, will give the visitor the option to share on every single network that Monarch supports. So within this pop-up, let's say I only want to have a couple networks enabled. So you go over to our networks tab, and I don't want to have all these on. I only want to have a couple shown. I don't want to create this huge pop-up with 30 networks inside of it. I only want to have these 5. Well, then I can have these 5 enabled, but then I can enable the All Networks button, which will still give those visitors who click that the option to share on any network in a different pop-up. So go over to the pop-up options. I'm going to enable the Display All Networks button and save. So let's refresh the page, and you can see that I only have 5 networks enabled, but if they click this button to load more buttons, then they're going to get an option to share on every single network. So that's a great button to have. It doesn't take up too much space, but it still gives people the freedom to share on their favorite social network. Remove icon spacing. So this is purely a stylistic choice. If you'd like to remove the space between the buttons and kind of create this big colored, multicolored block of buttons instead, it's a cool effect. And if you like it, then you can enable that. So I'll show you what it looks like here. I've now enabled remove icon spacing, which will remove the spacing between all the buttons. So you can see all the spacing has been removed, and it's kind of just a different style. So if you like this style, feel free to enable that. And finally, the hide on mobile devices option. If you think that pop-ups, which in particular might be maybe more annoying to visitors on mobile than it is on desktop, since it's a smaller screen, it's going to take up the whole screen. If you're at all worried about that, then you can choose to hide on mobile devices. It's also, I wouldn't worry too much about it being annoying, but if you have a bunch of different locations enabled, for example, let's say you have the sidebar enabled, you have the flying enabled, you have the pop-up enabled all at the same time. Well, on the desktop screen, there's plenty of space to kind of accommodate all those buttons. But on mobile, there's much less space. And since it's such a small screen, you really don't need to have all those enabled at once. You really just need one. In fact, usually the floating sidebars is plenty for mobile. So what I've done usually is enable the floating sidebar on everywhere, but hide the pop-up on mobile. So if you enable this, then that pop-up will only display when someone's on a desktop or a tablet. Okay. Next up are our color settings. So by default, the buttons assume the color of the network that they represent. So we've taken the color from these networks logos and applied those in the most recognizable. But when you have a lot of buttons, it can certainly clash with your design. All this rainbow of colors. You might be going for a more simple look on your site. And so if you want to adjust these colors, you can. And so to do that, you want to select the Use Custom Colors option, and then you can adjust these 4 settings, which are background color, hover background color, icon color, and hover icon color. So the background color is the background color of the button that is displayed by default, and the hover background color is that's the background color that you will get when you hover over it with your mouse. So it'll fade to that second color. And likewise, you can choose the icon color, which also affects the text color and the count, and then the hover icon color, which will change the text color when you hover over it with your mouse. So let's say I want to go with an orange color on my site. I might change this to orange. You can also input the hex color yourself in here if you like. And let's say I want to make it red on hover, and then I probably just want the icon color to be white, but you can adjust that as well. So I'm going to save and refresh. So you can see now I have this orange color. On hover it goes to red, and because I've selected white for both the icon color and the icon hover color, those stay white by default and on hover, but you can adjust those as well. So let me show you that. Now let's say I want to go for a really more subdued kind of light blue color for my buttons. I can do that. And because I've gone with this lighter color, I probably don't want my icon color to be white. It's going to be hard to read, so instead I'll change it to black. And save. And you can see there, so it's gone to this light background color, and I've changed the icon color as well. Finally, we have our post type settings. This is where you choose where you want your pop-up to be displayed. And you can choose it on a post type basis. So by default, WordPress comes with 2 post types. You have the post, which is like your blog posts, your articles, and you have your pages, which is your about page, contact page, etc. So if you want your sharing pop-up to only be displayed on posts, then you'd only want to select the post type. This is probably the most common way to set up the pop-ups, because sharing is usually done for articles and not necessarily your contact page. But if you want to target your home page, on the other hand, you can do that separately from the rest of your pages. So if you just want your pop-up to display on your home page, you can select that. And also if you have custom post types with your theme or your plugins, you can adjust those as well. So in this case, I have WooCommerce installed. So if I want the sharing pop-up to be displayed on all my product pages, I can do that. And since I also have Divi installed, which comes with the project post type, if I want the pop-up to be displayed on all projects, I can enable that as well. All right, well, that just about does it for the pop-up. If you have any more questions, be sure to ask us in the forums. And if you scroll down below this video, you'll get a written explanation of all the settings, as well as all new settings we add in the future.